This is your AP Government video on political socialization. Socialization is the process by which you get beliefs, and in this case we're talking about political beliefs. So you are not born with a specific set of political ideas you think are correct. This process happens over your time in life and experiences that have happened to you or your family. So we're going to talk about statistically the way that people get or socialize their political ideas. And I have set this up so that we're going to go from the strongest to the weakest. So your first or strongest agent is going to be your parents. This makes sense. Your parents are instilling morals and values in you as they raise you. Some of these things are going to be related to political beliefs that your parents have. Now, statistically, this is mostly party affiliation. So if your parents identify as Republicans, you are more likely to identify as a Republican. If you have parents who are split between their political beliefs, boys tend to identify with dads and daughters tend to identify with mothers. The second strongest agent of socialization is your education level. So people with more levels of education or years of education think that voting is more important. They're more likely to vote. They're more likely to participate in other ways, like writing letters to senators or donating money to political campaigns as well. And the higher your levels of education in more modern presidential elections, people with higher levels of education have been more likely to vote for more liberal candidates. The third thing is religion. Now, religion is very dependent upon which religion you are and your religiosity, which is how important is your religion to you. So obviously, some religions are more political than others, and some people's religion means more to them in a political sense than others. But generally speaking, the statistics say that Protestant Christians are the most conservative. Evangelical Christians of all types are the most conservative of any of our religious groups. Catholics are a very large swing voting group, partially because Catholic ideologies have some conservative ideas and some liberal ideas. So Catholics tend to swing between candidates that are both identifying as Democrats and Republicans, and often swing elections one way or the other. They tend to be really conservative on life issues like abortion and LGBT rights, but very liberal on things like immigration, helping the less fortunate, and things like that. Jews and Muslims both tend to be liberal, with Muslims just being slightly more liberal than average. The fourth one is racial groups. This has changed drastically in the last 20 or 30 years. Whites still tend to be the most conservative of all racial demographics. Black voters are the most liberal. In the last election, which is the presidential election of 2020, 91% of Black voters voted for Democratic candidates. And of all demographics, Black voters are the strongest supporters of the Democratic Party. Hispanics, which is a large group, also tend to be swing voters. Not all Hispanics vote the same way, but in the last couple of elections, 2/3 of Hispanic voters have been voting for Democratic candidates. Again, that is not, universal, depending upon how we break down the larger Hispanic group into subgroups. So Central and Latin American, Mexican American voters tend to be more liberal than their Cuban American counterparts. Asians tend to be liberal. About 2/3 of Asians voted for Democratic candidates in the last election. And now I know that here we're only breaking down the four major racial groups. There are obviously many different types of racial groups, even ones that are not represented here. The fifth is income, and now income disparities and these things near the bottom of the list, these are kind of small variations, but people with higher incomes tend to vote more conservatively, and lower income people tend to most often vote for liberal candidates. The sixth one is opinionated media figures. So if you are really passionate about following somebody in the news media, this doesn't even have to be a mainstream news media person. It could be a social media star. I put here, Ben Shapiro and Rush Limbaugh as examples. They can sway people's political ideas. The seventh one is mass media. So the particular news sources that you watch could sway your political ideas. Again, these things are all at the bottom of the list. Typically, things like parents have a much bigger effect than, what news stories you're watching. And the last one, and the one that's the closest, is gender. Women tend to be slightly more liberal than men. They're referred to as soccer mom voters because women tend to be slightly more liberal than men on things like gun control, sex-sensitive issues like birth control or abortion, and they tend to be very pro-education. Male voters are referred to as NASCAR dads because they're slightly more conservative. They are for weapon freedoms, bigger military, tough on crime, pro-police, and things like that.